Okay, I think we are now live over on Facebook. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly live. I do apologize for having to reschedule it, but I hope that maybe this has actually ended up being a better time for most people because it's a nighttime instead of during the original time, which was during the day. So today we are going to be talking about how you can manage screen time with your kids. I made a TikTok video and it was something like unpopular opinion, like it's okay to give your kids the iPad and let them watch TV. And it got so many comments on it. It got so many comments and questions and judgments. And so we're going to get into all of that today. I was just quickly making some notes. So if you see me looking off to the side, it's because I have a long list of some of the questions and comments that I received on that video. And I got similar ones over on Instagram as well and in my stories. So yeah, everywhere. This is obviously like a really hot topic that people are wanting to talk about, which fair enough, it is. If you are joining live on Facebook, feel free to put any additional questions or just engage and say hello. So I know you're there in the comments, and this will be saved as a replay as well. So even if you're here watching as replay, just put in hashtag replay and still say hi and chat to me like you're here live, because I do always come back to these posts to check if I've missed any questions or anything. Otherwise, let's just jump straight into it. So this is a really big topic because in the world that we're living in, we have so many uses for technology, and we're noticing now that our kids are needing to use it, whether that's because your child's school is like an iPad school or using laptops, or if it's because you've found yourself giving your phone or giving your child an iPad or whatever it is, or maybe you're on the other end where you're actually trying to avoid it. So I hope that in this conversation, wherever you are and whatever choices you're making for you and your family, that perhaps some of this information will be helpful to you. And there's a lot that we can cover. So I'll do my best to do this all, but it might actually require a few more chats about it. I don't think there's any way I could possibly give all the information, all my views, or hear all your views on this in what, like 20 to 30 minutes that we have tonight. It's definitely something that we need to be aware of. I don't think we can kind of like shirk away from it or hide from it, because our kids are around technology, and it's likely that they're going to grow up in this world with technology being much needed in the society that we live in. Like, that's just the reality of the society that we're living in, is that we rely very heavily on technology. I mean, look what we're doing right now. Like, you're either watching me on a screen or on your phone. So we are experiencing this as adults, and for our kids, they're experiencing this from like literally when they're babies and toddlers. So I think it's really interesting to think about like the historical, I guess, kind of context of that, where, you know, for some of us, maybe it's like our grandparents were the generation where the TV was out and that's what they grew up, started to watch. And then our generation was when like video games came out. And now for our kids, they're the generation where it's like iPads and phones. So this is definitely not something new. I think a lot of people think it's new because some people get the comments of like, oh, back in my day, like we didn't have that. But it's like, yeah, you did. Actually, you had like TV and radio. That was still technology. It's just that technology is looking different these days, and it's more easily accessible and it's more advanced because it is it's kinesthetic, like you hold it, or it's even VR where like you can kind of in a way physically be in it, or like the Wii boards that used to be really popular where you could like kind of work out with it. And then it's like sensory, obviously, with your eyes and your ears. So it's really just like evolving into this bigger thing that's really in many things that we're doing, like whether it's schooling or work or just everyday life. I mean, I use my phone to like pay. That's my wallet now. That's how I'm getting my kids to pay for things at the shops when they're helping me, is they tap my phone like to pay. So that's very different parenting to how we were raised and previous generations were raised. And I think it's really important to start there, to acknowledge that we are the first generation of parents having to deal with this. There is no handbook. There's no previous generations to give us their words of wisdom. We don't even have the time on our side to look at the longitudinal studies, because people love to talk about studies, right? But the reality is we actually don't have that data and information because it hasn't been long enough yet, specifically when you're talking about things like iPads and phones, because that's still fairly recent, that's becoming more popular with lots of kids. Um, okay, so let's just go through some of the questions I had. So I did have an interesting question where someone was talking about how their kid was getting an American accent. They felt like their child was watching so much, I don't know, screen time on a show, whatever it was. And at first I thought it was really funny because growing up, no one understood why I had a slightly American accent. And even now, sometimes people pick up on it. Like I can have a bit of like an American English and now Australian, like just kind of meld it into whatever is the way that I talk. And I used to make a joke about how it's because I grew up watching American TV because that's what we had access to. And in saying that, I was definitely not a kid on it all the time, but it had that much of an impact on me. So that question made me think about how I wonder if some of us are actually a bit more susceptible to picking up on accents, because I know when I'm around people that are English, that brings out more of that English accent in me. And it's like I become aware of it and I have to be mindful that it doesn't seem like I'm putting it on. But I just thought that was really interesting. I don't know if anyone else has felt that. I think I've seen a few stories online where people are saying that their kids are speaking with an Australian accent now because of Bluey, or with an English accent because of Peppa Pig. So yeah, I don't think we should be going straight to judging the parent as if that means that they're neglecting their child and never talking to them. I definitely think there'd be more going on with that. And I am one of those kids. Okay, another question was about them being concerned because it's the first thing that they grab straight up in the morning. Now, I do think it is important to balance this conversation with understanding that we probably do have a responsibility to teach our kids how to regulate their tech use. In saying that, a lot of us as adults don't even know how to do that for ourselves. We are still figuring it out because we are now realizing like, oh, wow, I cannot put down my phone. I'm actually having a really hard time stepping away from it, or recognizing how much you're on it, or if you feel like you're addicted to it, kind of thing. So I also feel like, how are we going to support our kids if we don't even know how to support ourselves with it? And I think this is also a larger issue. I think that these companies obviously don't shirk any of the responsibility with knowing exactly what they're doing. What was that Netflix documentary that was on recently about this? And yeah, basically it was talking about how the people that create the apps like Facebook, for example, they know exactly what they're doing and how to make it appealing and how to get the algorithm to try keep bringing you back. Like how it pings you like to come back. So I think that when you're worried about it first thing in the morning, it's definitely going to be a role modeling effort, because if the first thing you're doing when you wake up is going on your phone, then of course your kid is going to do that as well. And it would be a bit hypocritical to challenge that if you were not challenging that within yourself. So I definitely think a lot of the strategies that we should be implementing around tech use is first looking in the mirror, basically looking at how we are using technology and how we are modeling that to our children first, because honestly, we don't really have a right to be getting annoyed with them about their tech use while we're sitting there on our phone, like scrolling Facebook or whatever. So yeah, and I think we've got information coming out, obviously, that, yeah, ideally we don't want to be on it first thing in the morning, because I know when we talk about it for adults, you get that initial hit of like dopamine. And so then that's what makes you want to keep going only back to that, because dopamine is like a reward. And to overwhelm your brain the second from when you've woken up with all of that sensory input even isn't ideal. So I'm not going to sit here and be telling you, sorry, I've just got something popping up on my screen. Okay. I'm not going to sit here and tell you like, yeah, definitely don't be doing this. Like, that's really bad if you're doing that. That's not at all what this chat is going to be. The way I work is very much a compassionate way of working and giving ourselves a lot of self-compassion, as you'll see throughout this chat as well. So ultimately you need to do what is feeling right for you and your family, and whatever you feel comfortable to challenge at this point in time. Let's see, one of the other questions was about being concerned that apparently there's a study or something showing that kids have less attention span. There was even someone else that commented that apparently studies show smaller brains and addicted brains. And I get really annoyed when I hear about studies like that, because I don't understand why we're scaremongering and guilt tripping parents when at the same time we are completely in a society that benefits off technology. It just is so unbelievably hypocritical. And I understand it from the point of view of like kids' brains are still literally growing and developing. Like, yeah, of course, we ideally don't want that. But at the same time, it's not just a simple blanket statement you can make about every person, every family. And a lot of what I want to talk about is really to dive into that a bit more. But I'll see if I can just kind of cover through some of these questions. But I think it's going to be hard because I feel like my answer is going to be the same to a lot of these, which is essentially that you cannot come into this with an attitude expecting every single parent to follow the same blanket statement of do not give your child technology or only let them be on it for 10 minutes if they're 2 years old or whatever, some of the rules. If you see rules and regulations, they're made up. They're not actually based on anything. Someone's just put down a number of it. Like, yep, that sounds good. Yeah, of course, 2 to 4 year olds, 20 minutes. Yep, let's put that down. It's not really like, what is it based on? What did they do? Did they line up like 1,000 children that were all 2 to 4 years old and put like a quarter of them in front of a screen for 2 hours, a quarter of them in front of a screen for 1 hour, a quarter of them in front of a screen for 20 minutes? Like, no, because they can't do that. Like, that's not really an ethical study that they can do. So where did this number even come from? It's just made up. It's just made up. And to be honest, for a lot of people, when you look at those, you realize how much more your kid is on it than those recommendations. And that is just instantly going to drive guilt and shame into parents who are already feeling that way. They're already feeling that way. You don't need to tell them. So I get annoyed by these studies. Okay. I'm like tantruming, or I'm tantruming. I was going to say I'm tangenting. I read the word tantrum. I might have a tantrum. Let's see how this goes. Okay, anyway, so to answer that question of less attention span and smaller brains, I don't know why we're scaring parents with that information. The reason why it can seem like your kids have a less attention span when they're not on technology is because screen time is designed to keep them like fully attentioned to it, like with the pretty colors or the cute characters or the storyline or the sounds or the interactiveness or the game. It's designed to keep their full attention. It wouldn't be good or doing it properly if it wasn't. So I think that's where the comparison is coming from, is they're going, oh, my kid can't sit down and read a book for an hour, but they can sit on the iPad for an hour, no problem. That's like the attention span showing from two completely different activities that you can't really compare. And if people are trying to say that they've noticed that their kid has less of an attention span when they're not on it, I would be looking into a few different things. I would be looking into if that child is neurodivergent, which is a completely other thing to look into when you're looking at tech use, especially when we're talking about dopamine and serotonin and all that, because that's another whole thing in itself. And sensory seeking behavior, that's a whole other thing in itself. And also like if they're being bored or not. So like it's okay for kids to get bored, but you can't call that them not having attention span if they're bored. So it's like, it's just, you can't, it's not the same thing we're comparing it to when we're talking about those things. Another question was concern about using it out and about. And I think I did do a video response to this, and I was sharing about how before my husband and I had children, we were super judgmental. We would be out in public and we would see parents giving their toddler a phone in the pram or their kids their phone at restaurants, and we would sit there and we were so judgy. I like hate past us. And we're like, when we have kids, we will never do that. They will sit and eat and they will behave and we will like chat and it will be so great. Like, how good are we going to be? Fast forward to now, we're like, everyone sit down, here's our phones, great, we all get to eat a meal in peace. Yeah, it's funny how we're all perfect parents until we become one. So using them out and about, I like to pose the question of what do you gain from your child using technology? If you're out and about and they're getting really upset and squeamish, they don't want to stay in the pram, they don't want to stay in the trolley, you're trying to distract them from the lollies that are all at their eye level, that they're going to, that they're going to scream at you and want to take home, and you don't want to deal with that. Or if you're just trying to get them out the door because the baby needs to have a nappy change or needs to be fed or whatever is going on, or you're just racing to get something done because you don't want to be at the shops or whatever it is. If giving them technology allows you to get something done and allows it to be somewhat peaceful for everyone, it's not harming anyone. Is it helpful or hurtful? In many cases, it's helpful to you, and it's helpful to your child, because it's also not going to escalate into you threatening or getting annoyed at your kids. It might not escalate into a tantrum. And at that point in time, it might be what's a good choice for you. For us, when we use that dinner, it means all of us get to sit and enjoy a nice meal together. Or it means if we aren't paying or can't afford a babysitter and we have to bring our kids with us and it's like a date for us, then my husband and I can actually have a conversation. So you've got to think about, what are we gaining from this as well? Another good question is that their child is having a tantrum or meltdown when told to get off the technology. And I mean, think of it this way. If I came over to your house and you were watching TV and I just turned it off and I was like, time for bed. Or if you're sitting in a work meeting waiting for the meeting to start and you're on your phone on Facebook or sending an email or sending a text message to the babysitter or to your friend or something, and I just came and took your phone off you, how would you react? Like, yeah, they're going to get upset when you take it off them. Just like I would get upset if someone came and took my phone or turned the TV off or turned the game off. I mean, who else remembers doing that to their sibling because we knew it annoyed them? I definitely did that to my little brother once or twice. Turned the PlayStation right off. Oh, man. Memories. I cannot be the only one. Let me know if anyone else did that or if you had a sibling that did that to you. Yeah, they might be upset. They're allowed to be upset. Now, in this case, I'd be putting in some other parenting strategies, like either having a visual timer, like, you know, how you can get those like hourglass kind of things, if that's what you and your child are prior to agreeing on, like how long, like 10 minutes. Okay, I'm setting the timer. And so it's a discussion. So they're actually aware and knowing, and also giving them like a 5-minute warning, a 2-minute warning when the iPad or whatever time is about to be finished. Yeah, those are some parenting strategies that you should be implementing anyway, because it's respectful to your child to give them a heads up. And then another thing is then transitioning into something else. So what are they looking forward to after that? Or what are you doing together after? Where's the connection happening? That's a whole other conversation. So if you have more questions around that and what is or isn't working for you, let me know, because that's a whole topic in itself, really. Okay. So yeah, some of the things I wrote down and other people were reflecting back in the comments as well, which I was glad to see, was I had way more comments thanking me for making that video and talking and answering that question of what do you gain. Many of them talked about not being able to survive lockdown. Depending on where you live, perhaps you've literally been in lockdown for like that whole 2 years, or you're still in lockdown. I have family in Hong Kong and it's not finished for them over there. It's getting worse. I know for us in Australia, we're starting to have restrictions lift. I know America was in it, I think, longer for a bit. I can't even keep up anymore because everywhere seems to be dealing with it differently. But if you're in lockdown and if, say you live in a small apartment, you have no backyard, I mean, really, are we going to villainize parents for using technology to survive this collective trauma that everyone's been going through? I mean, it's really ridiculous. Other good comments were about pregnancy. Yep, that was one of my big reasons, was when I was pregnant and I had a toddler, or when I had my newborn and I had a toddler. And it was such a great tool to have, to know that my toddler would like sit still next to me in bed or be entertained or whatever whilst I dealt with newborn, or while I tried to have a nap because I was tired or whatever it was. And a lot of parents were talking about their kids being neurodiverse, whether it was having autistic kids or kids with ADHD. They were talking a lot about how that chills out their kid and really helps them too. And I also think that tech use can look different for your kids, because I know even between my two, one of them is very much that needing it to chill out at the end of the day, which is how I was growing up. And my other one is very much really good at self-regulating. Hops on, hops off, goes, plays outside, goes, plays toys, hops back on it for a little bit, goes, does something else, like just does whatever they want. So you also need to think about who your child is and how well you know them, and you can see what works for them and what doesn't. Another interesting comment was something about causing lack of creative thinking. And I don't even know where that came from, because I don't even know how you would measure that. Again, this is my common criticism of these studies, is how do you measure that? What does that even mean? Is there like, this magical number or magical thing you're supposed to do that has creative thinking. So one of my favorite tips to give parents with technology use is think of the 3 C's. Are they using it to connect or communicate with others? Are they using it to create something, or are they using it to consume? And we don't need to villainize the consuming, because sometimes that is an okay thing to do. But if you want to help differentiate the different kinds of way they're using it, or if you want to make sure you're incorporating all 3 ways of using it, think about that, like connect or communicate. So like chatting to people, making friends, talking to family, like FaceTime, creating. So like playing games or making artwork, or like drawing or making videos, or consuming, like, watching stuff, whatever. Someone asked if it was a problem if the TV was on in the background, but their child wasn't necessarily watching it. I don't know why that would be a problem. It would be a problem if your kid got sensory overload, but I would think you would notice that in their behavior. But having it on the background, I mean, some people, even for parents, it's just nice having the noise in the background. I don't see why it would be a problem. It's only a problem if you think it's a problem. What kind of limits should we be putting on screen time? Again, like I said, you will find information online, and they've just pulled a number out of somewhere. I don't know where. I would think, I mean, obviously I'm not sitting here saying, let your kid be on technology all day and all night. Like, we need to be reasonable. Come on. Like, I don't think you need me to tell you that either. Like, you would know if it was problematic for you and your family. I really don't need to sit here pretending like I have an expert answer. It's going to differ completely for different people and different families. And I would be putting limits depending on how your kid is responding. So with me personally, like I said, with my 2 kids, I have one that is on it, especially to calm down at the end of the day. But to be honest, if it's like the weekend, they would be on it all day if I let them. Whereas my other child self-regulates, hops on, hops off, hops on, hops off. It's not really that phased. So yeah, with one of my kids, I do need to help teach that regulation ability, or help find that balance between having breaks. And so that's a choice that we have to make. That's not like a hard and fast rule. That looks different each time. Depends on what we've been doing, depends on their mood, how they're feeling, if they're sick or if they're well, or whatever's been going on. But I talk to my kids about it. It's very much a conversation, because it involves them. You can't just make the choices for them. You have to involve them in on this. And I also think it's important for them to have autonomy and to get them to think about it. So I'll say, like, hey, like, do you think you've been on the iPad too much, or have you noticed how your mood kind of changes when you're on or off it? Like, kind of get them to realize and reflect and see in themselves, because again, that's teaching them for when they're adults, which is what we haven't had. We're all trying to do that now as adults, when we're already like addicted to these things, right? So yeah, you want to involve them as much as you can. If you're setting any limits, this is going to be a lot easier for older kids. And I say easier because you can communicate that better, and sit down and make your own rules together or whatever, and hear them out, and get them to engage in critical thinking and argue with you on that. Have a really good discussion. Let them state their points. Because if you're like a rural family, for example, and they've made friends online, then yeah, you're going to have to be mindful about the times of days they want to be on that to chat with their friends. It can't just be like a flat no during the school week, for example, whereas another family whose kids are going to school and see their friends every day, maybe that would be an appropriate rule for them, because they've seen their friends all day. They don't necessarily need to have that. So do you see how just in those 2 small examples, you can't have this blanket rule for everyone? It has to be very individually based, considering you and your kids. How do we know when screen consumption is becoming a problem? So yeah, definitely noticing if you see any big changes in their behavior, especially if they're becoming more aggressive, because I know that we do have studies coming out on that with like video games and how that can spark aggression. So definitely be looking to things like that. I'm not villainizing video games completely, because that's not always the case, because I would also argue that perhaps that game was an outlet for those emotions, and then when they're not in that game, using that as a tool to regulate those emotions, that's why it's a problem. I wouldn't necessarily think it's always to blame on the screen time use. It could actually be because that was band-aiding it, and then when they're not on it, that's when that's coming out. So I think that's really important to look into as well. And then I do think it would be unreasonable to have a kid or anyone on their screen time like all day and all night, especially all night. If it's disrupting sleep, then yeah, That's when limits should be put on, because that's affecting their well-being in other ways. If it's affecting basic needs like sleep, eating, then yeah, you need to like look into that a bit more. So I think there was another question about screen time. Is the issue screen time, or is the issue what is on the screen time? And I thought that was a really good comment that someone made, is they were kind of saying how it depends on what your kid is watching, whether it makes the screen time good or bad. And I would say yes, to a degree. I think definitely shows that have like real humans on it. So like Baby Einstein or Sesame Street or Play School, where they show actual real life children, is going to be much more beneficial because it's like real to real compared to only cartoons, for example. And then I would also be thinking about what are the children's shows and the characters depicting. So you want to think about morals and values, which is why a lot of people like shows like Daniel Tiger or Bluey, because they seem to align with more of that gentle parenting approach, and they're talking about emotions and social skills. And to be honest, sometimes I sit down and I'm like getting parented by these characters on TV. I'm like, that is good parenting. I especially felt that way with Daniel Tiger in the early days with my toddler. So yeah, I'm not going to say that yes or no to either one. Some people get really funny about like the princesses and Disney characters, because I know we can like crucify the messaging behind them, but at the same time, kids don't think in that way, and you can have these conversations with them in an age appropriate way. But some kids just want to be princesses. They just want to dress up and enjoy the music, and they're not thinking about all the extra bits that are going on into it. And if they were, or if you were worried about that, then you talk to them about it. The reality is that we can't protect our kids forever either. Like they can go and watch these things whenever they want when they're older. They could go to a friend's house and watch it. And you need to also think about the social aspects of kids feel like they're missing out. That's really not pleasant for them either, if they're the only ones in their friend group that aren't watching something, or they don't have the relatable content. So if you're concerned about something because it goes against a moral or value or whatever your concern is, use that as a teachable moment. Sit and watch it together with your child so you can talk about it. That's even better. That's even better if you're doing that. Like that's really good parenting if you're doing that. Not to say that you're not a good parent if you're not doing that, but I mean, if you think the answer is to not do it completely, that's not actually the answer either necessarily. What's the next question? I need to put a little note here. Okay. Comments about, so someone was like, because of how you can get comments from people being like, your kids will never want to go outside and make friends. They'll never socialize if they're on it all day. Again, I think we need to relook at the narrative of what we've been told socialization is and what we've experienced. Do you know who all my friends are now? They're strangers on the internet. And I grew up in the days of MySpace where it was like, don't ever talk to strangers on the internet. And if you're watching this and you're one of my friends that I've met online, you're laughing with me because I know a lot of us can relate. And my husband plays video games. He's made good friends, one of whom was in our wedding that he met online. So I don't think we should necessarily be villainizing technology use, because you can actually meet real people. Of course, cyber safety is important here. Whole other conversation if you want to talk about it, have any questions about that. But I don't think socializing is an excuse. Going outside, yeah, we want to balance that though. You want to balance doing both things. We don't want to go to the extremes of like our grandparents, or even for some of us who grew up where we weren't allowed back home until the street lights were on. That's like neglectful parenting. And of course, you want to balance it with our kids getting out into the sunshine and vitamin D and having like exploring outside or playing on the swings or whatever it is in your backyard or at the beach or wherever you live. Of course, you want to balance it. You also need to consider that doing that is likely going to require some energy from you of some sorts, especially when your kids are younger and you're going to supervise, right? So again, when I talk about what does technology give you, if you're a working from home parent, or if you're in lockdown and you have to work as well as raise your kids at the same time, then that's what I mean about the blanket statement, because for some people, they can't do that. Or what if you live in an apartment and it's raining and you can't go outside, or you don't want to go outside? Or in countries, I don't have experience, but from what I understand, in countries where they have like snowstorms, you can't go outside and that. So you can't just have this one blanket rule. It's all about moderation and trying to find balance. And that balance isn't going to be 50-50 all the time, and it's not going to look the same every day. I think we've actually pretty much covered everything. Just a few last little notes I wanted to add to this before I finish the chat. We did talk a bit about the hypocrisy of if we're getting annoyed at our kids while we're also sitting there on our technology. But I got one comment that did annoy me a little bit, and it was because the person was challenging me saying, like, what do you gain? And they were kind of being like, how selfish for you to make it about you as a parent and what you gain. Like, my thinking is, what do my kids gain? Like, just reeking of perfect parenting, right? And when you have that attitude, it's very problematic, because essentially what you're being is very ignorant and privileged and ableist. I really don't have anything more to say on that. You cannot have this blanket perfect parenting point of view where you're only focusing on the children and completely ignoring parents that are drowning and struggling. And I live and breathe this in my work and in my own experience as a parent and a human being in my own right. Outside of my hat of being a mum, I'm my own human being that has struggles, just like many of you are your own human beings that have struggles. And being a parent doesn't define you and put you into a box where it's like, that's it, this is your box, it's all about your kids now, it's not about this other person. Like, that's where we have mental health problems in our society, where parents are suffering in silence. And you cannot have that view. It's very ignorant, because you're ignoring everything else I've talked about in this chat, where you have to think of other factors. You have to realize that other people exist beyond what you experience, and how they experience life can be vastly different to you in many ways. So you cannot just have this thing that you say out there, and then someone reading that is going to feel all of that guilt and judgment and shame. That's very misplaced. But if they're not being supported, that's that dark hole that they're going to go into, right? Ableist, again, if we're talking about like disabled parents, like, or if we're talking about privilege, even with like finances to do like activities, or finances depending on where you live, if you have a backyard or not, or even finances whether you can afford technology for your kids or not, or whatever that looks like. There's so many factors at play here. It really annoys me when I see like blanket statements about what should and shouldn't be happening, because it's just not fair to the people that are genuinely struggling and that are trying their best. At the end of the day, everyone needs to make the decision that's best for them and their child, and them and their child. It can't just be best decision for their child. It can't just be best decisions for the parent. It needs to be both. The and is very important into meeting the needs of both. Compassion is really important. Compassion for each other, to be understanding that not every family and situation is the same. Self-compassion for ourselves when we have those really hard days and we feel like we're laying in bed at night and we're thinking of all the ways we could have been a better parent, but maybe we were really tired that day, maybe we were sick, maybe we were in lockdown, whatever it is. Just having self-compassion for understanding like this doesn't define me as a parent. Tomorrow I can make different choices if I want to. Not every day is going to look the same. Yeah, there's so much more to be said about this conversation, but I'm going to be hopping off now, and I look forward to reading your comments and thoughts on this chat. And yeah, if you have any other additional questions or anything I didn't quite cover, let me know and I'll come back to this chat. Otherwise, I will talk to you all very soon. Bye, everyone.